Alrighty, guys. Good afternoon. I hope you are having a great week. Feels like it's been a little bit since I've sent you a video since uh, we didn't do a new one last week because of the lesson that we were supposed to do on the day the church was canceled. But we're back. We are doing things a little different today. The lesson for this week was supposed to be the final lesson for the unit. I think we're in session or unit 16. Um, we've been looking at the book of Daniel. We've been looking at the people of God in captivity. Um, but Ronnie Reed, Michael Fleming, this is for you because Daniel in the Lion's Den was not in our curriculum, and I was highly offended and definitely wanted to get that lesson in. It's not just for those guys. They mentioned it to me last Sunday, but I feel the same way. That's such an important story. It might be the most important story in the book of Daniel. I don't know how we could not talk about it. There's two options. I'm going to still have Ashley attach the normal lesson for this week where you have the full curriculum. It's a lesson on God's omnipresence. Great lesson. There's nothing bad about that lesson. So I'm going to give you that option. You can either teach that or you can teach Daniel 6, which is a story of Daniel in the lion's den. I don't have any curriculum for you, but my goal in this video is to just kind of go over that story quickly and give you some talking points with that. So it'll be like, what your preference is. And I know that probably many of you will probably just teach the lesson in the curriculum because you've got curriculum already there. But at least if you feel like I do and want to cover the story of Daniel in the lion's den, at least you'll have this short video as a teaching aid to you. So without further ado, Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 24 is the story of Daniel in the lion's den. This is really the last real narrative part of the book of Daniel. Not that there isn't any narrative after this. There's a small portion, but after this, it's a lot of visions that Daniel has, a lot of prophetic literature within there. Not the easiest passages to interpret, but we do know that it's God's word, and it was he gave these visions to Daniel. But we're talking about Daniel in the lion's den. So he served under King Darius or Darius. I'm not sure. In today's language, we would probably pronounce it Darius, but it might be Darius. So whatever you want to call it. He was the king over the Medes and the Persians, and there was 120 satraps or satraps. I don't know how to say that word either, but I'm just clueless today. But they were essentially set over the entire kingdom as regional governors or regional overseers for the areas. And Daniel was one of them. And we know over the lessons that we've studied in the past week, we know that Daniel was a man of God who was faithful in a time where it was difficult to be faithful. And so his faithfulness to God, God blessed him, and he arose to being really the king's most trusted official or satrap. And the other satraps who did not worship God were probably more than likely, nationals, rather than this foreigner in Daniel. They began to get jealous. And so they kept looking for ways to bring up an accusation against Daniel. They couldn't find it. It felt like Daniel was perfect. So they go to the king and they say, King Darius, you are a great king, and you know what you should do? You should make sure that no one else is worshiping anybody else but you. So you should create an injunction that says, if anyone in the next 30 days lifts up a prayer or a petition to anyone else besides you, King Darius, then they'll be thrown in the lion's den. And King Darius says, that's right. I am the king. Like, I should do that. So he's like, I'll sign it. And the Medes and the Persians had a law that the king, even the king himself, couldn't revoke his own laws. So when he wrote and created a law and put his signet ring, upon it to signify, hey, this is law, it couldn't be changed. So they knew that, and so they also knew that Daniel was a man of God, and so Daniel, if he was being true to his faith, could not listen to this, and so that was the way they were going to trap Daniel. Well, they end up doing it. They catch Daniel praying to the God of the Bible, the only true God, and they take him to the king, and the king says, they say to the king, you said that you would throw him in the lion's den, and Daniel, your most trusted official, has done this. And so the king is forced to, it doesn't seem like it's an easy choice for the king. The king, even in fact, when he lowers Daniel into the lion's den, he says, may your God save you. All right. And what happens is there's a lion down there, and this was not like a domesticated lion that was just like, real calm and sweet. This was, I mean, the lion's job was to destroy or punish the enemy, and so to eat people. So this wasn't like, Daniel's fate should have been death in a very violent manner. Um, but Daniel gives testimony the next morning that he's alive and that God had sent him an angel to close the mouth of the lion, and that's where we get this famous story. We also see that at the end, Daniel's all these people that conspired against Daniel are thrown into the lion's den, and their bones were completely crushed. Right, there was nothing left, and so just a couple thoughts from this, and this is already super long, so I apologize. Maybe you can pause it and come back later and finish the rest of it. But a few talking points that I think are key for this. Number one, faithfulness to God will always be challenged by our circumstances. Faithfulness to God will always be challenged by our circumstances. It's called being faithful for a reason, because faithfulness carries this idea of devotion and devotion and abiding in the truth of the law of something, and that means that there's usually external forces that are trying to keep you from being faithful, right? And Daniel certainly had this here. He was in a foreign land. I mean, we've already read about his challenges he's had in the past, and now a petition gets signed that says, hey, if you pray to another god besides King Darius, who isn't a god, but they thought he was, then you'll be thrown in a lion's den. It's not you'll lose your job. It's not we'll execute you, which would hopefully be a quick, painless thing or minor pain. No, this was, I'm going to throw you in a lion's den, and lions are going to eat you alive. That's not a good way to go, right? So faithfulness to God will always be challenged by our circumstances. Secondly, the worship of God shouldn't be stopped by external factors. The worship of God shouldn't be stopped by external factors. There is countless testimonies of those in the Bible and those throughout history where, in the midst of persecution, when you try to push down Christianity or freedom of worship to God, it only increases and makes it more visible and makes it stirs revival. We get great testimonies like this, and we wouldn't get great testimonies like this if there wasn't an enemy that was pushing against us and pushing against who God is, and trying to deceive people. And so even though this law and this injunction was passed, Daniel was right. Like, this should not stop his worship of God, so we've got to think about that in our own lives. And then thirdly and finally, the enemies of God will face the wrath of God. The enemies of God will face the wrath of God. Not once do we see that Daniel tried to get these men back or tried to fight this ruling. Daniel seemed to have a peace that, as long as he was obedient to God, even if he did die, that would be the will of the Father, and God would be with him even in suffering and in death. And he would spend forever with God if that was his fate. And so, we tend to struggle with when someone does us wrong. We tend to struggle with not revolting or retaliating. And I believe this passage is a great example. Not that we're wishing our enemies to be eaten by lions. That's not the point of the message. But the principle is true, that whatever God's will for them, if they're not going to repent and turn to God, then whatever God has for them, it will be God's justice. And we don't have to take justice in our own hands. We should stand by it. We should stand for it. All right. But we don't need to be the ones that are doing that are going out and seeking justice and revenge on our own. Right. So when we do that, we just stoop to that level and we get to fight fire with fire. And that's pointless. Right. It's pointless. And so the enemies of God will face the wrath of God. So I hope that's helpful. Maybe one of you will teach the story of Daniel and the lion's den. I think it's a great story. But if not, just remember you have that other curriculum. I just don't have a video for that because I feel like, man, Daniel and the lion's den, you got to go to it. So anyways, thank you guys. Appreciate you guys so much. Have a great week. We'll see you Sunday.